بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا، وانفعنا بما تعلمنا، وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما، إنك على كل شيء قدير. So we're talking about what does it mean to be a thiqa. So it says وقال محمد بن عبد الله بن عمار الحافظ الموصلي: وقد سئل عن علي بن غراب فقال: كان صاحب حديث بصيرا به، قيل له: أليس هو ضعيفا؟ قال: إنه كان يتشيع، ولست بتارك الرواية عن رجل صاحب حديث يبصر الحديث بعد أن لا يكون كذوبا للتشيع أو للقدر، ولست براو عن رجل لا يبصر الحديث ولا يعقله ولو كان أفضل من فتح، يعني الموصلي. So I'm interested in him knowing his hadiths, not which sect he's from. وحكى الترمذي في علله عن البخاري قال: كل من لا يعرف صحيح حديثه من سقيمه لا أحدث عنه. وسمى منهم زمعة بن صالح وأيوب بن عتبة. وحكى الحاكم هذا المذهب عن مالك وأبي حنيفة. وحكى عن أكثر أهل الحديث الاحتجاج بحديث من لا يعرف وحكى عن أكثر أهل الحديث الاحتجاج بحديث من لا يعرف ما يحدث به ولا يحفظه. Right. So notice there's a conflict there. Right. It's like AI. AI doesn't actually understand itself, but is it reliable? Yes, in principle. Right. والظاهر والله أعلم حمل كلام الشافعي رحمه الله على من لا يحفظ لفظ حديث وإنما يحدث بالمعنى. Right? So when he's doing tahdith بالمعنى, does he know the hadith? No. Okay, so what's the point? But if it's باللفظ, you're just copying the word. I don't know what it means. That's fine. وكذلك نقل الربيع عنه في موضع آخر أنه قال: تكون اللفظة تترك من الحديث فيختل المعنى أو ينطق بها بغير لفظ المحدث، والناطق بها غير عامد لإحالة المعنى فيختل معناه. فإذا كان الذي يحمل الحديث يجهل هذا المعنى وكان غير عاقل الحديث فلم يقبل حديثه. إذا كان يحمل ما لا يعقل، إذ كان مما لا يؤدي الحديث بحروفه، وكان يلتمس روايته على معانيه وهو لا يعقل المعنى، إلى أن قال: فالظنة في من لا يؤدي الحديث بحروفه ولا يعقل معانيه أبين منها في الشاهد لمن ترد شهادته له فيما هو ظنين فيه. Right? So the condition is the person who narrates it not in verbatim. وبهذا يتبين أن الشافعي إنما اعتبر في الراوي أن يكون عارفا بعنوان الحديث إذا كان يحدث بالمعنى ولا يحفظ الحروف. Right? So notice as well, this is a standard that's far below the standards of the likes of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik. So Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa, they're interested in fuqaha, right? In general. Whereas Imam Shafi is not, right? In principle. فقوله هنا عاقلا لما يحدث به عالم بما يحيل معاني الحديث عن من اللفظ هو شرط واحد ليس فيه تكرير، بل مراده بعقل ما يحدث به فهم المعنى، ومراده بالعلم بما يحيل المعنى من الألفاظ مع الألفاظ التي تؤدي بها المعاني. وقد فسر أبو بكر الصيرفي في شرح الرسالة قول الشافعي عاقلا لما يحدث به بأن مراده أن يكون الراوي ذا عقل فقط، وهذا شرط بإجماع، فالذي قاله فيه نظر وضعف. هذا كله في حق من لا يحفظ الحديث بألفاظه، بدليل أنه قال بعد ذلك: أو يكون ممن يؤدي الحديث بحروفه كما سمعه ولا يحدث به على المعنى، فجعل هذا قسيما للذي قبله. فقسم الرواة إلى قسمين: من يحدث بالمعنى فيشترط فيه أن يكون عاقلا، right, obviously، ومن يحدث باللفظ. Right. وقد قال أحمد في رواية الأثرم: سعيد بن زكريا المدايني كنا كتبنا عنه ثم تركناه، قيل له: لما؟ قال: لم يكن لم يكن أرى به في نفسه بأسا ولكن لم يكن بصاحب حديث، وهذا محمول على أنه كان يحدث من حفظه أيضا فيخشى عليه الغلط. الراوي حفظ الراوي، فإن كان يحدث من حفظه اعتبر حفظه لما يحدث به، ولكن إن كان يحدث باللفظ اعتبر حفظه لألفاظ الحديث، وإن كان يحدث بالمعنى اعتبر معرفته بالمعنى وباللفظ الدال عليه كما تقدم، وإن كان يحدث من كتابه اعتبر حفظه لكتابه. وقد سبق كلام الأئمة واختلافهم في جواز التحديث من الكتاب وفي صفة حفظ الكتاب بما فيه كفاية. والخامس أن يكون في حديثه الذي لا ينفرد به يوافق الثقات في حديثهم. أن يكون في حديثه الذي لا ينفرد به يوافق الثقات في حديثه. Right? So this is one of the most important things. Right? One of the most important things. How did you get to the level of being a thiqa? I got to the level of being a thiqa by continually narrating hadiths that other people narrate. Right? You don't become a thiqa and have your own hadiths. That's not possible. If that 99% of your hadiths are the same hadiths that everyone else narrates. 1% are different. Right? So فلا يحدث أي فلا يحدث بما لا يوافق الثقات، وهذا الذي ذكره معنى قول كثير من الأئمة الحفاظ في الجرح في كثير من رواه يحدث بما يخالف الثقات أو يحدث بما يتابعه الثقات عليه، لكن الشافعي اعتبر ألا يخالف الثقات، ولهذا قال بعد هذا قال بريا أي بريئا أن يحدث عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بما يحدث الثقات خلافه. وقد فسر الشافعي الشاذ. Right, so the point is you know a hadith that is shadh once, twice, 3 times, now it's a problem. قال يونس بن عبد الأعلى سمعت الشافعي يقول ليس الشاذ في الحديث أن يروي الثقة حديثا لم يروه غيره. إنما الشاذ من الحديث أن يروي الثقات حديثا فيشذ عنهم واحد فيخالفهم. وأما أكثر الحفاظ المتقدمين فإنهم يقولون في الحديث إذا تفرد بواحد وإن لم يروه الثقات خلافه إنه لا يتابع عليه، ويجعلون ذلك علة فيه، اللهم إلا أن يكون ممن كثر حفظه واشتهرت عدالته وحديثه كالزهري ونحوه. So he's some kind of giant. Otherwise, the tafarrud of okay narrators is a problem in itself. Right? The tafarrud of okay narrators is a problem in itself. You have to be a giant to be. Right? وربما يستنكرون بعض تفردات الثقات الكبار أيضا، ولهم في كل حديث نقد خاص وليس عندهم لذلك ضبط يضبطه. قال صالح بن محمد الحافظ الشاذ الحديث المنكر الذي لا يعرف. Right? that's called غريب. It's called فرد. Right? حديث المنكر الذي لا يعرف. وسيأتي لذلك مزيد إيضاح عند ذكر الحديث الغريب إن شاء الله تعالى. Very important concept, right? That makes sense, Aban?
With his categorization of
So,
Hassan li Ghairi. So it's tafarrud of what grade of is it the giants or the okay one?
no, تحسن لغيره, that's not going to be included. That's not going to be تفرد of giants, no.
So it's tafarrud.
تحسن لغيره is a تفرد of somebody who's weak, but it's supported by other evidence. There's shawahid for it. That's Hassan
Okay.
when he says Hassan, right? So the issue is, it basically is how good are you in comparison to the unique thing that you're doing, right? Exactly like in your world, right, Aban? Like it's there's two consultants. They brought in different consultants on this topic. There's a very difficult issue. We're looking, right? And so number one, you're a consultant, so obviously you're on a high level, right? You're a consultant, so, but we're not going to accept any suggestion from a consultant. It has to be a normal suggestion. It can't be something crazy, right? But this guy walks in and says the kid doesn't have cancer, period. Goodbye, I'm going home. And walks out. And you're like, what? What are you talking about? Like everyone's like, what are we gonna do? This like stage 4 cancer. Like he doesn't have cancer, and he walks out, and it's like, now we would accept that statement from somebody who is a super giant, right? For to coming, going to say something crazy, right? Things are like that happen, right? Like you come along and say this, that is not a tumor, right? And he walks out, and you're like, how is that not a tumor? You know. So now it's like for you to, so what's going to happen is we're going to put the level up based on who you are, right? So this tafarrud from somebody, tafarrud on this topic, tafarrud on these things, all based on who you are, right? This is a really important concept, right? So the idea that there's many like huge fundamental errors in like these understanding. Like if you're a thiqqa, we accept your tafarrud mutlaqan. It's not the case. Like he's a thiqqa, so the hadith is sahih. It's not like that, right? Right. You notice he says it's not really. It says he says وَلَهُمْ فِي كُلِّ حَدِيثٍ نَقْدٌ خاص, based on the topic, based on the concept, based on who it is. وَلَيْسَ عندهم لذلك ضبط يضبطه. Right. Okay, so this is a really important concept. السادس ألا يكون مدلسا فمن كان مدلسا يحدث عن من رآه لم يسمع منه فإنه لا يقبل منه حديثه حتى يصرح بالسماع ممن روى عنه. وهذا الذي ذكره الشافعي قد حكاه يعقوب بن شيبة عن يحيى بن معين. وقال الشاذكوني من أراد التدين بالحديث فلا يأخذ عن الأعمش ولا عن قتادة إلا ما قال سمعناه. وقال البرديجي لا يحتج من حديث حميد إلا بما قال حدثنا أنس. Right, so Humayd al-Tawil studied with Anas, but he also narrates from Anas hadith that he did not narrate. So I want to hear him say that حدثنا أنس. ولم يعتبر الشافعي أن يتكرر التدليس بالراوي ولا أن يغلب على حديثه، بل اعتبر ثبوت تدليسه ولو بمرة واحدة. واعتبر غيره من أحاديث أن يغلب التدليس على حديث الرجل، وقالوا إن غلب عليه التدليس لم يقبل حديثه حتى يقول حدثنا. وهذا قول ابن المديني حكاه يعقوب بن شيبة عنه. وذكر مسلم في مقدمة كتابه أنه إنما يعتبر التصريح بالسماع ممن شهر بالتدليس وعرف به، وهذا يحتمل أن يريد به كثر التدليس في حديثه، ويحتمل أن يريد به ثبوت ذلك عنه وصحته فيكون كقول الشافعي. وفرقت طائفة بين أن يدلس عن الثقات أو عن الضعفاء، فإن كان يدلس عن الثقات قبل حديثه وإن عنه، وإن كان يدلس عن غير الثقات لم يقبل حديثه حتى يصرح بالسماع. Right, that's again assuming that you're going to do taqleed of whom that person deems a thiqat. Right. هذا الذي ذكره حسين الكرابيسي وأبو الفتح الأزدي الموصلي الحافظ، وكذا ذكره طائفة من فقهاء أصحابنا، وهذا بناء على قولهم بقبول المراسيل. Right? It's the same idea that I'm going to accept. If I accept the Mursal Hadith, I'm saying, well, you normally narrate from Thiqat, so now there's a gap in the chain, it's okay. Right? It's the same argument. واعتبروا كثر التدريس في حق من يدلس عن غير الثقات، وكذا ذكر حاكم أن المدلس إذا لم يذكر سماعه في الرواية فحكم حديثه حكم مرسل، وكذلك أشار إليه أبو بكر الصيرفي في شرح رسالة الشافعي. So this sharh doesn't exist anymore. There's a million shuruh on the risala that don't exist anymore. They're all lost.
Sorry, I think there's a typo. I meant when you normally do tadlis, you basically say that you're. I mean, I've met this strong narrator, or you're strengthening your chain by dropping a weak, like you're covering up something. Why would you do tadlis on a okay narrator, someone who's not that good?
So why would you take the lease of a weak narrator? Yeah, why would you do that? So the problem is that you do it. So why would you do it? So people accept your hadith?
But a weak narrative by, I mean, if you already, the way I've understood Tadlis is you don't have a chain, or say you have an issue with the person you're narrating from. So to strengthen it, you do anana on someone higher up in the chain, or to shorten a chain, or to strengthen it, right? So why would I, or is it like to get kasrat riwayat, like I'm just making up a chain, or I mean, like,
It makes so I think there's various reasons. One of them would be that it makes people trust you, even though they shouldn't trust it. Does that make sense?
as in quantity over quality, kind of, or
Yeah.
okay.
B, people wouldn't trust it when they should trust it. So you just don't tell me information that you think I don't need to know, but I actually do need to know. So you've made a judgment for me, right? When it's actually important.
I see.
Also,
Okay.
just the fact that that the whole art of being narrating, right? Like you don't see a difference between narrating from your co-student. There was a you and you. There was a sheikh, and you just quote the sheikh saying this. I know that you study with that sheikh, so whenever you quote the sheikh, I'm assuming you heard it, but you didn't, because you trust somebody, but I don't trust that person, right? So you don't even see as a difference, right? Just like the whole concept of mursal hadith, like yeah, I mean. Who do you think I am? I'm a tabi. I'm quoting the Prophet. Who do you think I'm quoting from? Some drunk, some liar. Like if I'm quoting the Prophet, I'm only going to quote the Prophet when I trust it. It's the same kind of the whole discussion, right? Do you need to show all of your cards or not? Right? Yeah, that's why I think Shu'bah said I prefer to commit zina than do tadlis. I do tadlis all the time. I do it all the time because I'm just speaking in a brief, like I'm confident. I'm speaking in a brief sense, and I can do it all the time. So I might quote a book. You're assuming that I referenced that book. But I don't. I didn't. I just trust that I know it's in that book, right? So, for example, you ask me Q&A, right? Let's take a summary. You ask me a question. Does it break my wudu if I touch my wife? And I say no. Hashit ibn Abedin. So what does it sound like? It sounds like I actually referenced the book. I actually picked up Hashit ibn Abedin and looked it up, right? That's why I put a reference. Why would you put a reference if you didn't do it? In reality, what I'm doing is I'm doing tadlis. It seems to you that I referenced the book, but I didn't. What I'm actually doing is this is such an obvious question in the Hanafi school that doesn't need a reference, but I'm just going to put a reference there just so that you come along and don't quote a hadith, right? Does that make sense? So that's how I actually function in my Q&A, right? In my Q&A online, I will always give a reference. Try as much as possible to give a reference because I don't want somebody else to give an answer without a reference. And basically, when I give you it's a very low level answer that doesn't need a reference. There's kind of no point. Like, what's the point of saying that? You know, if I touch my wife, does it break my wudu? No, what's it called mukhtasar quduri. Like, it's kind of a pointless reference. So, so I'm actually referencing something in a way that seems like I opened the book and looked at the ruling and told you, but I didn't. So it might actually not be there. So now you realize Freed does this, and you realize, like, hang on a minute, he did this like 10% of the time. And now, 200 years later, you're looking at my Q&A and you realize, you know what? Actually, whenever he quotes something, I don't even trust him. I don't actually trust that that hukam is actually found in that source. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right. So, hey, I'm doing it all the time. Am I doing it for a bad reason? I'm not doing it for a bad reason. Convenience, right? Making people trust the source. Like I'm trying to make sure that whenever I do a Q&A, I always give a source. So it makes it seem like reliable. Because how things work, the game that's played today is there's all these fake people, and they will just say something else, and you'll be fooled by them. So I'm just playing the same game, even though it's kind of a pointless activity half the time. Really? So we do fiqh without narration all the time. So what's the difference? Okay, so in fiqh you don't have to have authenticity. You can have doubt about the naql. So what? So that's the whole issue. Is like who came along and made it a crime? You know, I'm not saying. So we're not even saying it's a crime. The modelist is not a criminal. It's not a bad person, right? Yes, Shu'bah said I'd rather commit zina than do tadlis, right? But it's not a crime, right? Like the chain I mentioned is incomplete. What's wrong with that? Like, why can't I do that? Right? We do that all the time in fiqh. We do that all the time in everything, right? So the issue is, how are you going to authenticate? How meticulously are you going to authenticate? That's what we're talking about here. How meticulously, and what errors recurrently happened that warranted this level of meticulousness in your authentication. Does that make sense, Muhammad? Yeah. So I'm Hisham ibn Urwa, right? There's a 50,000 hadith that I've heard from my dad. Some of them I've heard from him directly, some of them I haven't. Who cares? It's all the same. So now when I narrate from him sometimes from my dad directly, and sometimes, and I just say, you know, from my dad. And I don't tell you specifically I heard my dad. I'm not going to lie. So now you don't know which ones did you hear directly or not, right? And later on, a generation later, you realize there's mistakes. So now I specifically want to know, does this hadith say hadathani or not? Right? But for himself, it's like, what's the difference? I heard it from my dad, or I heard it from somebody I trust from my dad. What's the difference? It's from my dad. Khalas. That makes sense? You know, it's like it's like getting a receipt. Like, do you have to have a receipt when you leave a shop? Like, why? Why do you have to do that? But then you realized, subhanallah, I've been tricked. I've been sold things for crazy price, right? You walked out of this shop and you're like, $10 for a chocolate bar? $10 for a chocolate bar? This is ridiculous. I'm going back, right? So, like, to say that somebody doesn't take a receipt when they buy something is not being irresponsible. But it's like, what is the context that gives you this extra level of responsibility and extra level of checks and balance and extra level of this and extra level of that, right? So authenticity is always there, but authenticity is a gray, is a spectrum. It's a spectrum, right? And possibility of error is a spectrum. So the checks and balances that will allow me to produce a car and sell it in South Africa are very, very high, given that people will sell anything and people die if cars are not safe. So for me to start a car company today, and I'm going to export it from Malaysia and into South Africa, and to be sold legally in South Africa is going to be extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. It's going to take me ages to do it. Right. Yeah. It's like, how can you have, why do you have receipts? Can't do anything with them. So it's all, so what this is a concept we mentioned before, is that the whole of the hadith world is a reaction to a reality of errors. So they're dealing with certain errors, and that's why they can have different standards at different times. So later on, when we get to manuscripts, you will not have a complete chain transmission, and you will not have thiqat, but you'll be looking for different things. When you're dealing with a manuscript, you're looking for different kind of things. Right? Today, when I buy a book, I trust the book. Why do you trust the book? I don't know who it is. So these people are majhul al-hal. Right? The editor is majhul to me. I don't know if he's reliable or not. I don't know. I'm using different standards to trust the book. Right? So these standards are created as a response to problems that happen. They are not absolute. it is not true to say that if there's no isnad, there's no authenticity. It's not true to say that because there's lots of things we don't have asanid from. So where did the asanid come from? From mistakes happening, right? I'll give you another example. Pause this recording. Totally insane, right? Like, what did they take? How old are they? What's some idea, right? Some idea, right? Even if this is going to be informal, right? This is Aban's cousin's friend who's going through an overdose, turns up at his house and like, oh my God, you help my friend right now. And then he said, oh, take him to the doctor. No, he's going to get taken by the police and whatever. So there's some level of steps that you're going to do. You don't just pull out a syringe, unknown amount of adrenaline, and inject it in someone's heart, right? Unless you're on in Hollywood, right? Is that true, Aban?
Yeah, Siddhi, that's
Right. So
yeah,
like
that's a
there's something that would be total ridiculous, right? And then there's things that like pedantic, right? Like, do we check this? Do we check this? Do we do this? Do we do this? Do we do this? Do we do this? Right? And then it has to be signed by your superior and signed by a second superior. Like, what's the point now? Like, how many superiors do you need to sign this? You know, three.
like a funny example of a pedantic thing is when they give the lethal shot to like death row convicts, they like rub the antiseptic before giving it. So yeah, that's like a bit pedantic. Like you're giving him a lethal dose, but like you're like, I don't want you to get that last second infection. So I
Exactly.
just
It's pedantic. Yeah,
yeah,
but like imagine, for example, now you are being watched, right? You are you experienced doctor. You have what you're doing, doing blood pressure, and you're being watched by three people. It's like why? So, but what if a band consistently makes mistakes, or people like a band making mistakes? Then yeah. And what if the person watching them doesn't really watch them? What if, right? So as a reaction to a reality of carelessness, of errors, we're going to heighten or decrease the level of accuracy, surety, etc. Right? Does that make sense?
yes.
Okay. It makes sense, Muhammad? So when you get a text message saying, I am in Germany and these are my birth certificates, you're like, Farid, why are you texting me? And like, just so that there's a backup, right? So that if I forget, I'll be able to message you and be like, these are my documents. I'm like, what? Like, this is so weird, right? But then you'll know the context, inshallah. So why is this important? I'm talking to a Christian, right? And I'm talking to a Christian and say, yeah, the whole of the Bible's made up. You have no asanid. Is that really true to say? So it is true to say that something with an isnad is more reliable than something else, and something with a critiquable isnad is more reliable and thoroughly critiquable and, right? But you can't come along and say if it has no isnad, it's just false. It's not true. You can
But
say,
there's no way of verifying it, basically.
yeah, but that doesn't make it false, though. You know what I'm saying?
Fair enough, but then that's the
Like,
whole discussion, right? It'll become
so
a free for all, and then
exactly. So let's look, for example, right, like Indian medicine, right? Traditional Indian medicine. Like, what's the, you know, someone's like, yeah, they used to cure like this, and like, really? I don't know. Ayurvedic medicine, like, really? Like, like a lot of these naturopath stuff is like I feel much better. Like, really? Like, what was your blood pressure before? What was blood pressure afterwards? If they didn't even check your blood pressure, you just felt like I feel really bad, and then you feel really good. Like, is it even real? You know? So, but that doesn't mean that Ayurvedic medicine doesn't work, right? Just to say you don't have checks and balances doesn't mean it doesn't work. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not actually logically sound to say that. It's just saying that, yeah, I don't know. I don't really trust it. That's all. So there's a difference between it's false because there's no chain of transmission, or it's not reliable at all, right? As opposed to it is much less reliable. So let's look at, I'm talking to a Christian and I'm trying to say, why should you, let's look at the Bible, let's look at the Quran and Hadith. key concept. For example, was Jesus crucified? No, he was not. Okay, why should you say that Jesus was not crucified? Because there's stronger evidence to suggest that he was not. Look, here's the Quran, here's the Hadith, here's this, here's that. There's stronger evidence. The evidence is just that says that he was not is actually qat'i. And what you have is extremely dhanni. So you should do taqdeem of qat'i ala dhanni, right? Not that it's batil to begin with. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
a hadith that has no sanad is not batil. Okay, what's my proof for that? What's my dalil for that? Right? Imam Malik narrating from Sayyidina Isa. Right? Imam Malik narrates from Sayyidina Isa. Obviously no chain transmission. So why is he quoting it? If it's batil, it's not batil. He's just saying it's very weak. That's all. So very weak is not batil. It's not the same thing. You know, Buddha said this. Maybe he said it. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not gonna, so maybe he said it. I'm not saying he didn't say it. I'm just saying that, so your problem then is you're relying on the Bible over the Quran Hadith when there's a huge, disparity in a level of authenticity, right? And that's so it's not reasonable. What you're doing is not reasonable, right? As opposed to saying it's batil because there's no sanad, right? Everything that has no sanad is batil. It's not true, right? Does that make sense? So we
Yes,
compare that.
I mean, like Shahid is like that, right? We have
Exactly,
this.
Poach, exactly. Who was there? Who was there, like, who was there when, it's just basically this is widespread and there we go. And a specialist said that. It's like, well, how did this person hear that person, right? What was it? Beowulf, right? Beowulf, like Anglo-Saxon poem. Like, we don't have a chain transmission for it. All we have is basically this manuscript that turned up in a church, I don't know, a couple hundred years ago, and the language and the writing style indicates it's probably about the year 800 ish, that kind of time, right? In the 8th century, right? So that doesn't make it false, just doesn't make it reliable, right? So the lack of a chain transmission does not make it false. That's not true, right? So the whole thing about tadlis is like, oh, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, right? Later on in the chain, you're going to mention places and dates. So I heard from so and so in this place and this time, right? And you say, well, it's inaccurate if you don't mention the place and time. Right? It's true. There's a level of inaccuracy if you don't mention the place and time. But did they used to do that? If you read the Muwatta, does it say the place and the time? It doesn't. When did Imam Malik study that hadith with Nafi'? How many times did he hear it? When exactly? Later on in Sama'at, we're going to ask when and where. Now, at that time, we're not asking when and where. So they're not absolute. These are not absolute standards. Okay. خير. وأما الإمام أحمد فتوقف في المسألة. قال أبو داود سمعت أحمد سئل عن رجل يعرف بالتدليس في الحديث يحتج فيما لم يقل فيه حدثني أو سمعت قال لا أدري. I'm not sure. وأما من يدلس عمن لم يره فحكم حديثه حكم المرسل. Right? So tadlis is a man studies with the sheikh and then he quotes a sheikh, but what he's quoting he didn't actually hear from that sheikh. Right? So basically it's kind of confusing because I'm assuming because you have studied with him, right? So the classic hadith is an example of that is Al-A'mash, right? We just mentioned A'mash, Mudallis. Well, A'mash narrating from Mujahid, from Ibn Umar, kun fi dunya ka'annaka gharibun aw abiru sabil. Right? So we find specifically in Sahih Bukhari, it says حدثني or سمعت, right? Specifically. So it's clear that A'mash actually narrated from Mujahid. All the other versions of the hadith mention Al-A'mash saying An Mujahid. And that is actually the correct narration of the hadith. The correct narration of hadith is A'mash An Mujahid. In reality, he did not narrate the hadith directly from Mujahid, from Ibn Umar. He narrated it biwasita, Layth ibn Abi Sulaym or somebody like that. So in reality, the hadith is not on the level of Bukhari Muslim. It's not in Muslim Aslan. Right? It's not on the level of Sahih Muslim. So the point is though, so Ali al-Madini, he says that Al-A'mash narrates about 10 hadiths directly from Mujahid, right? And Ibn Ali Madini mentioned specifically this is one of them, right? But others disagree. That's not true. He didn't narrate that hadith from him. So the issue is Al-A'mash does narrate from Mujahid directly, but will also narrate with a wasita without mentioning it. So now I don't know if it says A'mash and Mujahid, I can't trust A'mash because he does that all the time. Right? And notice in generally, Tadlis is something from Iraqiyin and not from Madaniyin, right? That's why the importance of the Muwatta of Imam Malik, right? 500 clean hadiths, right? Very important hadith, like they're kind of like the standard, right? Very clean. But a lot of these issues, arguably the whole hadith world comes through the errors of the Iraqiyin. Right? That's a bit of a hyperbole, but okay. ومتى صرح بالسماع أو قال حدثنا أو أنبأنا فهو حجة. وزعم أبو الطيب الطابري من الشافعي أنه لا يحتج بقول مدرس أنبأنا لأنه قد يكون إجازة. Right? وهذا ضعيف فإن مثله يتطرق إليه قوله حدثنا أيضا فإن ذلك جائز عند كثير من العلماء في الإجازة كما سبق. ثم إن الإجازة والمناولة تصح رواية بهما على ما تقدم فيحتج بحديث من حدث بهما حينئذ. وأيضا فقد تستعمل حدثنا في الإرسال كما قال الحسن يقول حدثنا ابن عباس ويتأول أنه حدث أهل البصرة لكن هذا استعمال نادر والحكم للغالب. We're not talking about random scenarios, we're talking about normal. وأما قول الشافعي إن التدليس ليس بكذب يرد به حديث صاحبه فهذا أيضا قول أحمد وغيره من You're not lying, right? لأن قول المدلس عن فلان ليس بكذب منه وإنما فيه كتمان من سمع منه عن فلان, right? And it's not necessarily كتمان لإرادة الإفسادا. You're not trying to do something bad. You can just like, yeah, it's just not really, you know. You just mention it like that. وحكى الخطيب هذا القول عن كثير من العلماء. Right? So here, case in point. حكى الخطيب هذا القول عن كثير من العلماء. Who told you that? So Ibn Rajab said that Khatib said. Who told you that Khatib said that? I don't know. Okay, weak. So do I just ignore the statement? No, it's okay. You just quoted a statement without a chain transmission. I trust it. So we're doing that all the time. We're mentioning a hadith, quoting people without chain transmission. We do that all the time. وعن بعضهم أنه كذب يرد به حديث صاحبه وممن قال إنه كذب حماد بن زيد وأبو أسامة. قال شعبة وهو أخو الكذب, it's the brother of lying. قال مرة هو أشد من الزنا وروي ورى رزق الله بن موسى بن عنوكي قال لا يحل تدليس الثوب وكيف يحل تدليس الحديث, right? Like you cheating somebody in terms of cloth or what kind of cloth it is. How about hadith then? هذا في تدليس عن غير الثقات في الظاهر, right? So there's something else, right? Somebody who's tricking people, trying to do something bad, right? That's something else. قال أحمد في التدريس أكرهه، وقيل له قال شعبة هو كذب، قال أحمد لا، قد دلس قوم ونحن نروي عنهم، it's not كذب. قال يحيى بن معين كان الأعمش يرسل، فقيل له إن بعض الناس قال من أرسل لا يحتج بحديثه، فقال الثوري إذا لا يحتج بحديثه، وقد كان يدلس، وإنما سفيان أمير المؤمنين في الحديث. والتدريس مكروه عند الأكثرين لما فيه من الإيهام، وهو عن الكذابين أشد. Right? That's something totally different, right? That you skipped somebody who was a liar, right? That's problematic now. So I say in the Shafi'i school, zina is halal. Who are you quoting? My lying friend. Well, why can't you say that then? Right? Because I'm assuming you're Fareed, you're a Shafi'i. I'm asking you a Shafi'i question. You said in the Shafi'i school, but you didn't mention your source, and the source was a liar. Like that doesn't make any sense, does it? Right? As opposed to in the Shafi'i school, this is halal. And I don't quote my source. Okay, big deal. I do that all the time. But وهو عن الكذابين أشد. That's really that's problematic, right? Just like mentioning a fabricated hadith and not telling people it's fabricated. Right? وقد صرح طائف من العلماء منهم مسلم في مقدمة القدام بأن من يروي عن غير ثقة وهو يعرف حاله ولم يبين ذلك لمن لا يعرفه أنه يكون آثما بذلك. Right? That makes sense. Like I'm narrating from some weak person in Transoxiana or Transoxia, however you pronounce it, and you don't know that he's a weak narrator. Right? That doesn't make any sense. And you have no way to know that. You're in Egypt for crying out loud. I have to say, and narrating from so-and-so, and he was weak, right? That's kind of obvious. As opposed to letting you do ijtihad, and you have no ability to do ijtihad on that issue, right? That's kind of obvious. ويريدون أنه فعل محرم فإسقاط من ليس بثقة من الحديث أقبح من رواية عنه من غير تبيين. ورخص في التدليس الطائفة، قال يعقوب بن شيبة من رخص فيه فإنما رخص فيه عن ثقة سمع منه. Or maybe you think he's a ثقة, right? So we like, oh, you do tadlis from Layth ibn Abi Sulaym and he's weak. Well, he's weak in your opinion, not weak in my opinion. So don't blame me that I didn't mention the source, right? So I'm gonna, for example, right now you ask me a question and I check it. I open it up in Nihaya of Imam Romney. He's like, yeah, but that's the old print. It's not reliable. Well, I think it's reliable, right? You know. So I don't have to follow your standards of what's reliable or not. So I might do tadlis from somebody who I think is okay and you don't think is okay. So that's the problem. That's why the issue is when you come in later generations, I don't know what's going on. So I need to find out who did tadlis, who does not do tadlis, and find out what's going on. I need to see I'm trying to see the picture for myself. So as for labeling that person as a liar, as somebody who's not being dishonest, who's tricking people, it's a totally different issue, right? وكذا قال يعقوب وقد كان الثوري وغيره يدلسون عمن لم يسمعوا منه أيضا فلا يصح ما ذكره يعقوب. Right? So they would study with somebody, hear somebody else quote that sheikh, and they would quote the sheikh directly, and it sounds like they narrated directly, but they didn't. الحديث المعنعن وشروط قبوله. قال الشافعي رضي الله رحمه الله وأقبل الحديث حدثني فلان عن فلان إذا لم يكن مدلسا، ومراده أنه يقبل العنعن عمن عرف منه أنه ليس بمدلس. فإن ربيع نقل عنه أيضا قال في كلام له لم يعرف التدليس ببلدنا في من مضى ولا من أدركنا من أصحابنا إلا حديثا، فإن منهم من قبل عمن لو تركه عليه كان خيرا له، وكان قول رجل سمعت فلان يقول سمعت فلانا، وقوله حدثني فلان عن فلان سواء عنده. Right? لا يحدث واحد ممن لقي إلا ما سمع منه، فمن عرفناه بهذا الطريق قبلنا منه حدثني فلان عن فلان إذا لم يكن مدلسا. So notice he's talking about problems in Iraq. These are issues in Iraq. Maybe in Egypt, maybe in Sham as well. And these are Iraqi problems. So when he says ببلد, I'm talking about Mecca and Medina. People wouldn't do that أصلا. He says وظاهر هذا أنه لا يقبل العنعنة إلا من عرف منه أنه لا يدلس ولا يحدث إلا عمن لقيه بما سمع منه. Right? You only narrate from people that you've met and only the hadith that you heard from them. وهذا قريب من قول من قال إنه لا يقبل العنعة إلا عمن ثبت أنه لقيه. وفيه زيادة أخرى وهي أنه اشترط أنه يعرف أنه لا يدلس عمن لقيه أيضا ولا يحدث إلا بما سمع. Inshallah, we'll continue from here inshallah ta'ala next week. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. This class is going to go on for a long time. And I just want to ask, I don't know who else is going to join the class. So Adib, so both of you, Aban, you're going to be in India for some time?
Yes, I'll be here for a while, inshallah.
Because this